They say a week is a long time in politics. You know, it's funny, about a week or so ago, anyone who voiced concerns about the direction of the incoming Trump administration was said to be spoiling my vibes. They were called a black pillar who needs to get into the crystal and so on. Yet somehow now, after a few truly awful tweets by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, stating exactly what they have said dozens of times before, the exact same concerns about the exact same people have suddenly gone mainstream, as we are told that they have gone quote-unquote mask off about things that were patently obvious months ago to anyone who pays the slightest bit of attention. It can admittedly get a little frustrating being ahead of the curve most of the time, but you know, the more important thing is that now everyone gets it. Anyway, in among the usual noise on Twitter, basically a raw sewage pipe at this point, there was like a little gem buried in the many pools of slop. A little tweet by Morgoth which caught my eye, and it somewhat got to the nub of the issue. Morgoth said, "Needless to say, I couldn't give two flying Fs how successful Apple, Google and Tesla are or are not." Now in this video, I want to focus less on Musk or Ramaswamy and more on why it is that the merchant class that they represent, why those who champion their brand of pro-capitalist liberalism are so hooked on mass immigration. Now on this point, I have never been convinced by the argument put forward by some rightists that it is simply ethnic revenge or hatred. This has never really struck me as ringing true. If someone has an idea which is genuinely predictive, that is, it has genuine predictive power, I think we should pay attention to it, even if that person is bad in many other ways. Now, one such idea was put forward by a man who was bad in many ways, a certain Vladimir Lenin. In his Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, written in 1917, Lenin made a number of observations and predictions about the general trend in global capitalism. Incidentally, a handy book, if you're into reading Lenin, is the 3-volume Selected Works, which has all the essential stuff. Now, before we get into Lenin's comments on immigration, it is first important to understand what he means by imperialism. Here, he is not necessarily talking about, for example, the British Empire in and of itself run by the British state, but rather as the empire and British state as a kind of racket and front for the capitalist rentier class. In the history of this channel, I have often pointed out, for example, that the British Empire, that is the British government, spent £2 for every £1 it got back in foreign trade. But Lenin tackles this point head on. He says, "The annual income Great Britain derives from commissions in her whole foreign and colonial trade, import and export, is estimated by Sir R. Giffin at £18 million for 1899, pretty much the peak of the empire in the 1890s, taken at 2.5% upon a turnover of £800 million. Great as this sum is, it cannot explain the aggressive imperialism of Great Britain, which is explained by the income of £90 million to £100 million from invested capital, the income of the rentiers. The income of the rentiers is 5 times greater than the income obtained from the foreign trade of the biggest trading country in the world. This is the essence of imperialism and imperialist parasitism. For that reason, the term rentier state or usurer state is coming into common use in the economic literature that deals with imperialism. Now, I just need to pause here, folks, because I have my January sale on, and you know what that means, don't you? Pick up a course today using this fantastic promo code.
Sure. And so, sure.
Sure, Dan.
Can you command a comma like Joseph Conrad?
Sure.
And sure, Dan.
Are you magnificent in your mastery of marginalism like Murray Rothbard?
Sure.
Sure, Dan.
Are you legendary in your logical levelling of lamentable loquacity?
Sure.
Sure, Dan.
Come on down to the January sale at the academic agency. Promo code SureJan for 25% off. All this January, I got more courses than the Queen had horses.
Sure, Dan.
I got better rates than Andrew Tate's had mates.
Sure, Dan.
I got better deals than Lizzo's had meals.
Sure.
Sure, Dan.
And so, sure. And so, sure. And so.
Now anyway, where were we? What is crucial to understand here is that for Lenin, imperialism is not done for the glory of Britain and its people, or for the glory of America and its people, but rather for the narrow and private interests of the capitalist rentier class. According to Lenin, the 5 characteristics of imperialism are as follows, and I'm going to go through each 5 of them now. So number 1 is economic concentration. And we can see in 2020, the richest 1% of individuals in the world owned 45.8% of global wealth. In 2024, the top 10 companies in the world accounted for 19.5% of the index's market capitalization, a figure that has steadily risen. And in the interests of academic integrity, I can tell you these stats come from the communist channel Red Star, where you can find a lecture that was given there by some Indian dude. Okay, second, we have finance capital dominance. Banks become dominant in controlling capital and merge with industrial capital and practically all the other sectors of society. This fusion of Wall Street and Main Street is called finance capital and represents the emergence of an oligarchy. In 2023, the assets of the world's top 50 largest banks combined amounted to around 89 trillion dollars, which is bigger than the combined GDP of the USA, China, Japan, Germany, India, Russia, UK and France. This is around 50% of all of the world's banking assets just in those top 50 banks alone. BlackRock, which is not a bank but an asset manager, alone manages over $11 trillion in assets and has a stake in practically every major corporation. Third characteristic of imperialism, capital export. David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage is destroyed by the reality that capitalism seeks constantly to expand into foreign markets with direct investments. In the earlier stage of capitalism, which is so beloved of libertarians like Elon Musk, Milton Friedman, etc., it was typically goods that they sought to export. But in the later stage, when monopoly rather than competition reigns, capitalism seeks to export capital. In the layman, this is building factories in Mexico or in China or insert third world country here. This interest in emerging markets was ultimately behind that class of capitalists who supported Brexit here in Britain. For example, Jacob Rees-Mogg made his money in emerging markets. Fourth characteristic of imperialism, spatial stratification because of corporate dominance. The biggest companies by market capitalization at the time of writing are Apple, that is $3.59 trillion, Nvidia, $3.39 trillion, Microsoft, $3.15 trillion, Amazon, $2.19 trillion, and Alphabet, which is the owner of Google, of course, and of YouTube, where you're watching this, $2.09 trillion. The top four firms in the information services industry account for 73% of the total market, while in transportation and warehousing, the top four account for 60% of the market. These sorts of figures of, the top 2, 3, 4 companies having a huge market share are typical across many different industries, and I've talked about that before on this channel. And fifth, we have monopolies. All of what I've discussed, all of what Lenin discusses, gives rise to monopolies, which are ultimately parasitic and lead to stagnation and decay, higher prices, and lower quality. Now, with all this understood, whither mass immigration? Lenin's comments on this are especially interesting. He says, one of the special features of imperialism, connected with the fact I am describing, is the decline in emigration from imperialist countries and the increase in immigration into those countries from the more backward countries where lower wages are paid. As Hobson observes, emigration from Great Britain has been declining since 1884. In that year, the number of emigrants was 242,000, while in 1900 the number was 169,000. Emigration from Germany reached the highest point between 1881 and 1890, with a total of 1.4 million emigrants. In the course of the following 2 decades, it fell to 544,000 to 341,000. On the other hand, there was an increase in the number of workers entering Germany from Austria, Italy, Russia, and other countries. According to the 1907 census, there were 1.34 million foreigners in Germany, of whom 440.8 thousand were industrial workers and 257.3 thousand were agricultural workers. In France, the workers employed in the mining industry are in great part foreigners, Poles, Italians, and Spaniards. In the United States, immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe are engaged in the most poorly paid jobs, while American workers provide the highest percentage of overseers or the better paid workers. Imperialism has the tendency to create privileged sections also among the workers and to detach them from the broad masses of the proletariat. Now, these comments from Lenin have led Marxists and communists historically to be quite divided over the issue of immigration. There is quite a nuanced essay on this by the famed French Marxist philosopher Etienne Balibar, who was a mate of Louis Althusser's, called Lenin, Communists and Immigration, which is worth seeking out if you're interested. On the one hand, they support mass immigration in a kind of Machiavellian way, because they view it as capitalism's way of inevitably breaking down the nation-states, which is a necessary stage in history according to Marxist teleology. Also, they hope foreign workers and native workers might one day put aside their differences to see the true enemy, their mutual enemy, the enemy of all mankind, the evil capitalists. This is the workers of the world unite bit of communism. Lenin, it should be noted, puts it in a bit of a less idealistic way. He writes, "There can be no doubt that dire poverty alone compels people to abandon their native land, and that the capitalists exploit the immigrant workers in the most shameless manner. But only reactionaries can shut their eyes to the progressive significance of this modern migration of nations. Emancipation from the yoke of capital is impossible without the further development of capitalism, and without the class struggle that it is based on. And it is into this struggle that capitalism is drawing the masses of the working people of the world, breaking down the musty, fusty habits of local life, breaking down national barriers and prejudices, uniting workers from all countries in huge factories and mines in America, Germany, and so forth. In this way, the most backward countries in the old world, those that more than any other retain survivals of feudalism in every branch of social life, are, as it were, undergoing compulsory training in civilization. For Lenin, bringing essentially feudal peasantry into modernity, even if it is under the exploitative forces of capitalism, is necessary and progressive, since the feudal peasant can hardly be expected to support a communist revolution if he does not have a properly capitalist master to wage it against. Hence, in a warped way, mass immigration is refueling the stock of proletariat potential revolutionaries. On the other hand, as per this recent article by the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of Great Britain, they see mass immigration as a weapon against the working class, given that it drives down wages and wrecks union bargaining power. Now, I got quite a kick out of reading various splinter groups of communists bickering over this issue. For example, this letter to the LRP, that is the League for the Revolutionary Party. Hey, where's the Revolutionary Party League? He's sitting over there. Anyway, there was this hilarious passage from the LRP, from the Socialist Labour Party, on why Marxists should be pro-immigration for evil capitalist Britain, but anti-immigration for good communist Cuba. Does the SLP defend or oppose the British capitalist state immigration laws? Yes or no? Socialists clearly do not advise the capitalist class in Britain how best to keep foreign workers out. This is ABC for any socialist. The SLP should loudly and proudly oppose all capitalist immigration laws. On the other hand, there is Cuba, a deformed workers' state. Socialists defend Cuba from capitalist counter-revolution and attack. Cuba belongs to the international working class, despite its leadership. It has the right to defend itself, and this means it must tightly police its borders, as it is encircled by hostile capitalist enemies led by the USA. This means restricting immigration, and more importantly, emigration of its trained professionals and skilled workers. The SLP should be against all capitalist Britain's immigration laws and for the right of Cuba to defend and police its borders. There is no contradiction here, as Britain and Cuba are two different, antagonistic types of state. In capitalist Britain, all immigration controls are necessarily discriminatory, racist, and anti-working class. Now, how's that friend-enemy distinction? Is it strong enough for you, comrade? Well, anyway, what I found interesting about all this was a section later on in this same letter where the comrade realised that mass immigration necessarily changes the character of a nation, and, most interestingly of all, that nativist and chauvinist elements and sentiments in the society would ultimately win out before the national character, that is, can be irrevocably changed. The LRP, however, reiterated their allegation that a 1974 article by the Spartacist League, SL, where are the League of Spartacists? He's sitting over there. I did that joke already. Anyway, on the question is openly chauvinist and cited the following passage. If, for example, there were unlimited immigration into Northern Europe, the population influx from the Mediterranean basin would tend to dissolve the national identity of small countries like Holland and Belgium. Workers' Vanguard, 1974. There is no suggestion in this passage or elsewhere in the article that such a hypothetical development would necessarily be a bad thing. All it states is that a sufficiently large-scale change in the ethnic composition of the population of a particular territory must inevitably change its national character. This is simply a fact. The LRP asserts that the next sentence in the Workers' Vanguard article shows that the SL regards massive immigration as a real danger. In reality, of course, long before immigration would actually affect national identity, a chauvinist reaction penetrating even into a traditionally pro-socialist working class would cut off further inflows. Here, bizarrely, we find a dyed-in-the-wool communist being more realistic about mass immigration than Elon Musk or Vivek Ramaswamy. My point here is not, of course, to endorse communism or Lenin, but rather to point out that mass immigration has been part of their theory of capitalist imperialism per se for over 100 years at this point. They see it as a feature and not as a bug of capitalism. Thomas Carlyle's concept of perpetual nomadism writ large and international. It seems to me that Lenin's theory has had predictive explanatory power on this score. Virtually every aspect of what he said would happen vis-a-vis the concentration of capital, the financialization of developed economies, the exporting of capital, and the mass importation of, as he called them, backward peoples into rich imperialist nations has indeed come to pass. In fairness, others too called this, not least Brooks Adams, who discussed the West needing to suck on fresh blood to renew itself in 1895 in his seminal book, The Law of Civilization and Decay, a book I discuss in The Prophets of Doom, Buy It Now, etc., and Oswald Spengler, also a chapter on him in Prophets of Doom, by the way, Buy It Now, who discussed the rising tide of colour against white world supremacy in The Hour of Decision in 1933. What matters most, though, is not which writer or figure from history called it, but rather that it seems that no matter what, global capitalists are going to keep following this course, since it is in their very logic to do so. Perhaps this is why Elon Musk has been haughty and dismissive and tripling and quadrupling down against the baying mob this past week. But for populists, for people who have been taken in by MAGA or by Trump, or here, let us say, by Nigel Farage, it should be becoming clearer to you that you simply cannot make your anti-immigration movement and sentiment work with people who are ideologically committed to defending capitalism no matter what. All right, some stuff to think about. Later, comrades. Later, comrades! Oh, and remember, promo code SHOREJAN, 25% off. See you tomorrow, folks. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic, and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.